This podcast is brought to you by the National Animal Nutrition Program, sponsored by USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. Hello and welcome. Today, we're tackling a really pressing issue, the impact of climate change on beef cattle production. We're joined by Avery to discuss some new research and strategies highlighted in an article by Beck and Beck, published in Applied Animal Science. Avery, it feels like we hear about drought constantly now. What's the big picture for beef producers?
It's a huge topic, Zia, and you're right, it's becoming the new normal for many. For a long time, particularly from the 1980s up to the early 2000s, much of North America's cattle country experienced a period of generally above average rainfall. A lot of the common agricultural practices producers use today were really developed and fine-tuned during that wetter period.
Right, so the rule book was written for a different climate.
Exactly. But now, the science and the data, like what's shown in this article, indicate the climate has shifted to a much drier cycle, something more reminiscent of the 1930s or 1950s. This directly hits forage production, which is the absolute cornerstone of the cow-calf industry. It's simple, really. When the grass doesn't grow, producers have to find something else to feed their cattle, or they have to reduce their herd.
And that usually means destocking, doesn't it? Selling off parts of the herd when forage gets scarce and feed prices skyrocket. What does that do to the market?
Well, it creates a very difficult cycle. When drought forces producers to sell, they're often selling into a flooded market because their neighbors are in the same boat. This drives down the price they get for their animals. Then, when the drought breaks and the grass returns, everyone wants to rebuild their herds at the same time, which drives up the price of replacement heifers and cows. It creates these massive, volatile swings in the cattle supply, which is it's detrimental to long-term profitability and sustainability.
It sounds like the old way of managing things, just reacting when a drought hits, is becoming completely unsustainable. So it seems the conversation has to shift from being reactive to crisis to becoming truly proactive in managing for these climate challenges.
That's the key right there, Zia, being proactive. And thankfully, there are some really effective management strategies producers can start to integrate. The first big one the article discusses is what it calls intensified production.
Intensified production? That sounds like it could mean a lot of things. What does that actually look like on the ground for a rancher?
Yeah, it's a broad term, but it really boils down to making the land you have more productive and more resilient to dry spells. It's not about just throwing more inputs at it, but being smarter. For instance, targeted fertilization. Instead of broadcasting fertilizer everywhere, you use it strategically to boost forage growth in key pastures at critical times.
Okay, so a more targeted approach. What else?
Another great technique is stockpiling pastures. This is a big one, especially in certain regions.
Can you explain that a bit more? Stockpiling? You mean setting a pasture aside and letting the grass grow to be grazed later?
That's it exactly. Producers can let forage accumulate in a pasture during the late summer and early fall when growing conditions are still decent. Then they can graze that stockpiled forage deep into the fall or even early winter. It's a fantastic way to extend the grazing season and dramatically reduce the number of days they have to feed expensive hay. And then, of course, there's rotational grazing.
A concept that's been around for a while but is maybe more important than ever?
Absolutely. Systematically moving cattle between smaller paddocks or pastures prevents overgrazing, gives the forage plants time to rest and regrow their roots, and improves soil health and water infiltration. It's all about improving the harvest efficiency of every blade of grass that does grow and making the entire system more robust.
That all makes a lot of sense. So you're essentially building buffers into the system and maximizing the resources you already control. But let me press on this a little, Avery. what about the herd size itself? I mean, even with all these great techniques, you can't magically support the same number of cattle if there's just fundamentally less rainfall over the long term, can you?
That's an excellent and critical question, and it leads us right into the second major strategy, which has to work in tandem with the first one, adopting flexible stocking rates.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, for generations, the standard practice was to set a fixed stocking rate, the number of animals per acre, based on what the land could support in an average or sometimes even a good rainfall year.
Ah, and that's the trap we talked about earlier. Because when a drought year inevitably comes along, you're suddenly way overstocked, your forage disappears, and you're forced to sell cattle at a loss.
You've absolutely nailed it. The proactive approach completely flips that logic on its head. The recommendation now is to set your core cow herd numbers, the mother cows that are the engine of your operation, based on the carrying capacity of your ranch during a poor rainfall year.
Wow, okay, that's a big mental shift. But my first thought is, what happens in the good years? If you're stocked for a drought, aren't you just leaving a ton of money on the table by letting all that extra grass go to waste when the rain does come?
Ah, a great question. And that's where the flexible part really comes into play. You aren't just leaving it. In those wetter, more productive years, you bring in stocker cattle.
Right, stocker cattle. For listeners who might not be familiar, what are those exactly?
Stocker cattle are typically younger, weaned calves that a producer buys. The goal is to graze them on pasture for a season to add weight, and then sell them, usually to a feedlot. They are a short-term enterprise. They act as a dynamic, flexible buffer for your forage supply.
I think I'm getting it. So, in a good year with lots of grass, you buy stockers to eat it. In a bad year, you just don't buy them. This way, you're using the resource when you have it, but you're not locked into a large herd size you can't support.
Perfectly said. You use the stockers to harvest at bonus forage in good years, but you're not tied to them long term. If a drought is forecasted or starts to develop, you simply don't buy stockers that year, or you can sell the ones you have early. The crucial part is that your core breeding herd, your genetic factory, remains intact and unstressed.
You're not forced into that panicked cycle of liquidating your main herd at a low price when everyone else is also selling. That's brilliant.
It's a powerful tool for managing risk.
So, when you put it all together, combining these intensified forage management techniques with a really smart, flexible stocking strategy, the end goal here is to build a much more resilient cow-calf system, one that can, bend without breaking during these climate extremes, and most importantly, remain economically sustainable for the long haul.
That is the ultimate goal, yes. It's about building a business that plans for variability instead of just reacting to crisis. It's a fundamental shift in mindset for sure, and it requires more intensive management. But it's absolutely crucial for creating a sustainable and profitable cow-calf operation that can thrive in the climate of the 21st century.
Well said, Avery. It's certainly a lot for producers to consider, but it really sounds like a necessary and very smart path forward. Thanks so much for breaking that all down for us today.
My pleasure, Zia. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in.
This podcast was generated by Wondercraft and moderated by Nan P.